Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
George Ross Sr. and Myron Ho, and we're fellow practitioners of Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism. And basically what I wanted to do is just give you a little background of what it is that we practice and show you what a little bit of our practice is. And I know that Myron's going to give a little experience about how he's used his practice to overcome health problems, and George will share some of his thoughts on why he started practicing and what attracted him to this particular kind of Buddhism. And maybe, I don't know, has anybody heard of the Soka Gakkai SGI or Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo? Yeah. See, say Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, more people raise their hands. Feel free, I'm going to, here, we're going to take these and pass them around. Feel free to take one or more of these cards. It has the Nam-myoho Renge Kyo phrase on it and contact information if you'd like to learn more about us or come to a meeting. Our organization has 12 million members who practice this Buddhism in 177 countries in the world. The vast majority of those people live in Japan, where this Buddhism originated. And though here in the United States, our organization is called Soka Gakkai International, which means Value Creation Society. And it was originated in a group of educators in 1930s in Japan. The gay and lesbian group that we have has about 300, 400 members here in San Francisco, and some people are practicing with us all the time, and some are come in and out like any group. But what I wanted to explain a little bit about was where did this Buddhism come from, and how is it kind of different than some of the other Buddhisms that I'm sure you've all been exposed to. When Shakyamuni Buddha preached, he preached a number of sutras, and one of the last ones, or the last one he preached, was the Lotus Sutra. And a lot of people didn't pay much attention to the Lotus Sutra because it was very different than some of the other sutras like the Dainichi Sutra, etc. And but it became really kind of a central focus of this particular branch of Buddhism. And what happened is that in 13th century Japan, there was this guy named Nichiren Daishonen. And he really was a student. He was a monk. He was a student of Buddhism. He really studied a lot about the Tentai school. He understood Zen really well. He understood all different kinds of Buddhisms. And he really realized for him that the Lotus Sutra was sort of the pinnacle teaching. And the way that the Lotus Sutra kind of differed than other kinds of Buddhisms, a lot of people who practice other kinds of Buddhisms practice things that happened before the Lotus Sutra. And the Lotus Sutra really said, enlightenment isn't something that you attain, it's something that you awaken to. And this was it was profound and very, some people thought it was heresy almost, that it wasn't, that if anybody could become, or was already enlightened, what did that mean? You didn't actually have to do all these austerities. This is kind of scary from a political standpoint even. And what Nichiren Daishonen did was he took the essences of the Lotus Sutra and created a practice out of it, part of which we practice every day, twice a day, which in the morning and evening we recite part of the Lotus Sutra, and I'll pass this around. This is my book, and this is two different chapters, or portions of two different chapters from the Lotus Sutra. The Expedient Means chapter, if you are all familiar with the Lotus Sutra, and the Lifespan chapter. And the Lifespan chapter really encapsulated the practice for people who are common, like us. The phrase Nam-myoho Renge Kyo means literally devotion to, that's Nam, Myoho, which is the mystic law, Renge, which means cause and effect, but it means specifically the lotus flower. and kyo, which could mean various things: a sutra, a teaching, sound vibration. So strung together, we're chanting devotion to the mystic law of cause and effect through sound vibration. And in fact, Nam-myoho or Myoho Renge Kyo, without the Nam on front, Myoho Renge Kyo is the title of the Lotus Sutra. So what we're doing is we're chanting the title of the Lotus Sutra when we chant repeatedly. Now that seems kind of silly, but somebody once expressed this to me. The word Japan means the entire country of Japan, and the culture and everything in it. It embodies this sort of consciousness in our head. And saying Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, basically, we're expressing the entire Lotus Sutra. So we chant part of the Lotus Sutra. We recite part of it. It's in sort of Japanese pronunciation, which we do phonetically. But then chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is considered the essential part of the practice, which is really why we do this, is to awaken Buddhahood within. And what is Buddhahood within can be variously described as becoming eternally happy, having a sense of strong conviction about your life, that you're a profound person, you have a deep mission, that your life has meaning beyond whatever your day-to-day problems are. And so we're awakening this indestructible happiness. We're chanting. It's often talked about as polishing a mirror and pumping up our life force. And we do this as much as we can. Some people chant 5 minutes a day. Some people chant 3 or 4 hours a day. Depends on whether or not you have a job. I have a job. I can't chant 5 hours a day. One of the other things that I wanted to say briefly about Nichiren Daishonin was that he was very much persecuted by a lot of different Buddhist groups, and not just because he was practicing that a lot of other Buddhist groups thought was heretical, but he was also persecuted because he took a stand against government, and government in Japan at that time was very linked to religion. In fact, it still is in many ways. But some of the things that Nichiren Daishonin espoused were the equality of all people, that there's no difference between the Buddha and you are the Buddha, that men and women equally have enlightened properties, which at that time was considered just unbelievably, insane, because women were not considered the same as men at that time. So it's a Buddhism of absolute equality, absolute freedom. We call it the Buddhism of absolute freedom for us because it says basically the only law is the law of cause and effect. We do a good cause, we get a good effect. We do something bad, we get a bad effect. It's all about personal responsibility, and that there's nothing outside of us that will help us or intercede for us or anything like that. So again, those were really revolutionary ideas in 13th century Japan. What I would like to do, with your indulgence, I'll pass this around. We have in our homes, this is the miniature version. This is called a gohonzon, which means object of devotion. This is a traveling size for people who travel a lot. They can carry it with them, because in your home you'll have a big altar and enshrine it, a scroll with the same stuff on it. And I'll explain a little bit about that. You want to pass that around? And you can't really unenshrine your gohonzon, and then if you travel for work or whatever, you can't take it with you. So this is a sort of to remind us what is there. We don't chant to a statue or anything like that. We chant to the scroll, and the scroll says in the middle, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and all around it is depicted various parts of life. And Buddhism talks about the 10 states of life, or the 10 worlds, from hell, hunger, animality, all the way up to bodhisattva and Buddhahood. And this Buddhism says that they are all together in a human being, and it's not possible just to be Buddha. You have to be Buddha and in hell. There's Buddhahood in hell. There's Buddhahood in hunger. There's Buddhahood in anger. And practicing helps awaken ourselves to use the life states of hell and hunger and animality so that they don't use us. So we become masters of our own lives, and we employ human states. And there are other things in here on the little gohonzon there that talk about, they're basically enlightenment as we are. That all these facets of our life mean that we become happy or enlightened as we are without having to give anything up, because it's not possible as a human being. This is what Nichiren Daishonin said. It was not possible as a human being to rid yourself of desires, but actually through your desires, through working through your desires, you become happy. And a lot of that has been misinterpreted, I think, to mean that people who practice this Buddhism chant for cars and monies and stuff and get happy, like Tina Turner and stuff like that. In one way, that's, I think, true, in the sense that when I first started practicing, my partner who introduced me to the practice, she said, well, chant for what you want. And we wanted to buy a house in San Francisco with no money. And I said, well, I want to chant for this particular house that we can't afford. And she said, fine. She said, chant for it. And I said, okay. And I chanted to prove it wrong. And you know what? We got that goddamn house. And I had told her, I said, if we get the house, I'll never stop chanting. And so I'm still chanting, and it's like 8 years later, I'm still paying for it. And for the longest time, I thought the benefit, really, of me chanting was getting this house, this incredible house in Castro. But in truth, I realized that was the conspicuous benefit. That was a piece of cake. The inconspicuous benefit was what changed in me, which was this. I had always believed that I could never have dreams because they would always be ruined, that somehow I'd never get what I want, and so why even bother dreaming for anything? And so this taught me that I didn't have to give up my dreams just because I thought they were impossible, that I actually could fulfill what I thought was my dream. And in the process, I also realized I had a determination, and I never stopped believing that I could get it, and that I never gave up. And that was another sort of thing for me, was I always tended to give up before the race got started, because I figured, well, why bother? I'll never get it anyway. So it really confirmed for me the conviction that I didn't have to give up my dreams, and that there were things that I could really work for. What we're going to do is a brief part of this, and unfortunately I forgot to bring enough copies. I was going to bring enough copies of our little Gongyo book. Gongyo means assiduous practice, which means basically what we do 2 times a day. We are going to do a short version of it, Myron and George and I, and we'll do the part that is the Lotus Sutra really fast. It'll take about 3 minutes, and then we'll chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo a little more slowly, so that if you want and listen to it, you can participate or just absorb it. That's up to you. Okay, is that cool with everybody? What happened to my Gohonzon? Who's got the little book? That'd be the little no, the little thing that was in there. Could I have it back? Can I have it back for right now, and then I'll let you have it again? So we're chanting to this. It's like a mirror, looking at it, looking at this is the mirror of Buddhahood. So I'm chanting, looking at my Buddhahood every day. No, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. A lot of Buddhist traditions have beads. We have beads too. Boy, do we have beads. In fact, most religions, I think, have some sort of thing you have in your hand. The rosary is basically from the same background. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. Myo Renge Kyo, Hoban Bonani, Nidi Sajan, Samaya, Nidi Kosha, Twice a day for about, it ends up being about a half an hour long in the morning because we go through the prayers 5 times and in the evening 3 times. And we read a lot, we study a lot. The writings of Nichiren Daishonin have been, not too long ago, published into one entire volume. And these were letters he wrote to his followers, and there's a lot of really great stuff in there. He explains the meaning of life in his letters to his followers. He was pretty much alone. He's kind of like the embodiment of the standalone spirit. And there wasn't really that many people who were doing the same thing he was in 13th century Japan, and so he was exiled, and he was almost beheaded twice. And anyway, he had an amazing life condition for somebody who went through such persecutions. And the other thing that we get is a weekly newspaper called the World Tribune, which our organization puts out and has a lot of information, guidance, and study material and so forth. And before you leave, I brought with us this is an introduction to the Buddhist practice, but from our standpoint. So you're welcome to take one of these. They're gifts to you, as well as one of our members who's a gay guy who lives in Southern California. He wrote a book called Open Your Mind, Open Your Life, a little book of Eastern wisdom. And there's a lot of stuff from other kinds of Buddhism, too, in here. But they're just really great thoughts that he donated these to give to you guys as gifts. With that, I'd like who was I going to have to talk first? I see. George, why don't you sit here so that they can record you? Explain why you practice, etc.
Hi, I'm George.
Hi, George.
Hi. she introduced me as George Ross Sr. That's because I have I had several, but I have a son who's junior, and he lives in the Bay Area also. So when he moved here, that's when I started to be called Senior. Before that, it was just George. Anyway, that's why she knows my son also. Thank you very much for inviting us. It was a very pleasant feeling in this room. Congratulate you all. What I'd just like to share with you is how I started practicing, and to some extent why I continue to practice. I started practicing in 1984. Before that, I had been married for 15 years, and my wife and I actually divorced in 1980. We were separated for a little while. I had 4 children, and before I got married, of course, and before I lived before I went to Costa Rica. I went to Costa Rica with the Peace Corps in one of the first groups that went there with Kennedy. I had been in the seminary, Paulus Fathers. Some of you may know the Paulus Fathers are the ones that run St. Mary's in San Francisco. And I had been in the Paulus Fathers for 5 years, which meant I was 2 years of philosophy and then a year of novitiate, and then 2 years of philosophy, of basic theology. And that's when I left. So I was in the seminary for 5 years. And then when I came out and I went into the Peace Corps, I got married when I was in Costa Rica to a Costa Rican girl. And we had children, 4 children. When I get back to the United States with my family in 1974, I got very much involved in the local Catholic Church. I played the organ and organized things, and I was a member of different organizations. And then when my wife and I got divorced, everything was cut off. Because they said, well, you can't be a leader if you're divorced. And I thought, well, that's strange. Anyway, so for a while I didn't practice any religion. Well, a couple of times I would go to the Jesuit church figuring, well, maybe they got something to say. I mean, to me, because I never started practicing this Buddhism because I was against Catholicism. I just stopped practicing Catholicism. Anyway, so one day in 1984, a group of people were going by my house, and I was sitting out on the stairs. This is in July. May. And so it was very hot in Boston. And I was sitting with a couple of friends. We were drinking. They were drinking scotch. I was drinking beer, so they were ahead of me. And this group went by, and they just stopped, and this young woman said, we're going to a Buddhist meeting. You want to come with us? Now, when I was in the seminary, we studied all world religions, and, of course, we studied Buddhism. So I had studied, as you would, kind of a introduction to all forms of Buddhism. And I was always attracted by the philosophy of Buddhism. And I practiced yoga for a while, and I studied Zen Buddhism. And I read a lot about Buddhism. And so when she said, you want to come to a Buddhist meeting? I said, yeah, why not? And so my 2 friends said, what's that? I said, I don't know, let's go. So we went, it was a couple of streets down, and we went there, and they chanted what you just heard us chanting. And as soon as I heard the chant, and then met the members that were there, it was like, yeah, this is what I want to practice. Because it was like a vibration, like sympathetic vibrations in music, And so it rang true to me. In the practice, we say there's faith, practice, and study. Well, I had studied. I still study Buddhism. But I didn't know what the practice was because I tried the different practices. And although I liked them, it didn't seem to do the same thing. So anyway, I started because I had the attraction to the members because they seemed like they had a very high life condition, and my life condition was not very high at the time. And the practice, I liked it. I mean, the candles, the incense, the bells. Why not? And I was prepared. I was prepared for that. Yeah. And so it made sense. Anyway, so I started practicing, and then I found that my life began to get more balance. But it was like Diana said, it's kind of, what is this? This is strange, sitting before a piece of paper and chanting these words that we don't understand. But again, being brought up Catholic, that didn't surprise me. Bread becoming body and blood? No. So, I could handle that part of it. But anyway, so I continued practicing because I didn't have anything else. It was like Diana said, it was you get some things and you can say, wow, this has changed, and this has changed. Maybe it comes from the practice, and maybe it doesn't, And I still have those experiences, and it doesn't matter anymore. And then, that was 1984, and then in 1986, my identical twin brother was diagnosed with AIDS while he was visiting in Boston. He was from San Francisco, and he was visiting my mother, who was sick. And anyway, in 1986, my mother was in one hospital dying, and he was in another hospital, and they didn't know what to do. I mean, they put the food under the, if he ate, they didn't know this in 1984. So they put the food under the door or something, somebody would pick it up, and they all looked like ghosts, Anyway, when he was in a hospital outside of Boston, we finally got him to a hospital in Boston, and he got through the, what is it called, the lung disease? Breathing, huh? Yeah, I forgot all the terminology. And then he was transferred. He came to San Francisco, and then my mother died. That was in July, and then my mother died in November, and then in February we got into a program with the National Health Institute of Health in Washington D.C. And we did a bone marrow transplant, so I was able to donate my bone marrow to him. So for about a month, 6 weeks, it was like he didn't have anything, because he had my immune system. But then afterwards, it re-emerged, and he died in March of 1989. And so I was going through that. I just got through a divorce. And I had my mother was dying, my twin brother, and my job terminated. So I said, knowing what I knew about this stuff, I should have been either dead or in a nut house or something with the amount of stress, and yet I kept chanting. And that was, again, the inconspicuous benefit, was that I was able to overcome it. And that's one of the things I studied this Buddhism. The lay organization has a leader, Daisakya Kela, and he talks a lot about what the essentials of the practice are. One of the things he says is, we don't practice Buddhism in order to not have problems. Buddhism is about life and about life on this earth, and their problems are part of life. But in order to overcome them and change them into opportunities and make them become your means for building a happy life. So that's why I continue, is because once in a while, everybody lapses in their practice, and when I do, then I find that life becomes a little heavier. So, and I think that's why all of us practice any spiritual exercise, is in order to live a better life. So I thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you.
And he is gay, too. He left that out. That was in there somewhere.
Only on weekends.
Oh,
yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Myron, and what I wanted to do was share with you, they talked about faith, practice, and study. We talked a little bit about, we showed you the practice, we talked a little bit about study. And what I'm going to share with you is my experience. Last year I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and how I use my faith or practice to overcome it. I joined the SGI, or Soka Gakkai International, almost 14 years ago in August of 1988. In 1995, I moved from Honolulu, Hawaii to San Francisco, California to work for Bank of America. In the fall of 1997, I left the bank to work for a small Massachusetts financial services consulting firm. Working as a banking consultant, traveling across the country on a weekly basis does have its perks. I traveled, dined, and slept at some of the most impressive hotels, all on the company's dime. I even got to keep my frequent flyer miles. Although this schedule sounds exotic to some or rough to others, I love my job. However, this schedule has its downsides. Living out of a suitcase, not knowing anyone in cities at which I worked, but the worst was maintaining a consistent practice. For the past few years, my daily practice consisted of chanting late at night or early in the morning, in airports, and even on airplanes. But I persevered. Nichiren Daishonin writes about faith in one's practice in the Gosho, upholding faith in the Gohonzon. He says, when one embraces this mandala, and he's referring to our Gohonzon here, all Buddhas and gods will either gather around him, accompanying him like a shadow, and protect him day and night, as warriors guard their ruler, as parents love their children, as fish rely on water, as trees and plants crave rain, or as birds depend on trees. In March of 2000, I helped my company obtain a contract with a mid-sized bank in Hawaii. Being from Hawaii, I thought this would be the perfect working situation. Although I still had to work, I could enjoy time with my family and friends. Life could not be better, but this was not to last. Around the end of May, I noticed a lump under my right armpit and later near my right collarbone. I didn't think much of it as I thought I was in good health. I mentioned it to my partner Galen, who urged me to see a physician in Hawaii. About 2 weeks later, I finally made time to see a doctor at a local clinic. After 3 weeks of examinations, a CAT scan, and a biopsies, the doctors in Hawaii were still trying to determine what was wrong. In the meantime, I began to have extreme sciatic pain in my right leg. I mentioned this to the doctor, who ignored it and prescribed some pain medication. This subsided the pain and caused me to sleep most of the day. During this time, my mother, sister, and friends would stop by or visit daily to check and comfort me. At this point, Galen insisted that I return to San Francisco to have my primary care physician examine me and determine the status of my health. Galen and my mother even got into an argument over this decision. My mother felt she could care for me and wanted me to stay in Hawaii. Reluctantly, my mother agreed, and I returned home to San Francisco on June 29, 2000. The day after my arrival, I went to my doctor's office. He took one look at me and promptly admitted me into the hospital. Over the 4th of July weekend, the hospital medical staff performed 12 MRIs, 4 CAT scans, 4 X-rays, and 2 biopsies. On July 3rd, 2000, which is also what we call in the SGI Mentor and Disciple Day, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The course of action was to have 4 sessions of chemotherapy and radiation treatments. After the first session, everything seemed to be good. The pain subsided. I had no nausea or side effects. This was not to continue. After the second chemotherapy session, I contracted a bacterial infection in my chest catheter. My mother later told me the hospital staff tried 7 different antibiotic medications to inoculate the infection, but it was the 8th attempt that worked. Otherwise, it would have died. After the 3rd chemotherapy session, I endured effects of a bladder infection. Throughout the chemotherapy session, I experienced pain in my right leg and foot. My hair fell out, sores developed in my mouth. This situation caused my appetite to decline, overall losing about 40 pounds. Although the nurses treated me with the utmost care, I hated being in the hospital. At times I cried, thinking, how could I be so sick? I began to have doubts about my existence and my survival. I relied upon my faith to overcome these feelings of hopelessness. During my recovery, I consistently read the SGI publications to keep my spirits up. One of the goshos that I read over and over was Reply to Kyo that Nichiren Daishonin wrote to one of his disciples. Believe in this mandala with all your heart. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is like the roar of a lion. What sickness can therefore be an obstacle? With all the side effects that I experienced, even my oncologist began to question my survival. After completion of the 3rd chemotherapy session, my oncologist decided to test my bone marrow. She felt I might not survive another session of chemotherapy. Well, to our surprise, just 4 months after my diagnosis and not having to endure another chemotherapy session, I was declared free of cancer on October 23rd, 2000. Last July, I was in agonizing pain. Today, I'm full of joy and appreciation to be alive. Getting over the cancer was a test of my faith. But the true benefit of this ordeal was the love, care, and support from everyone, whom many are SGI members. Galen and my mother overcame their differences regarding my health care. This was also the first time my mother formally recognized the relationship that I shared with Galen, my same-sex partner of 4 years. In her gratitude, my mother told me that she would not interfere between Galen and I in the future. In closing, I would like to share with you the most powerful guidance that I read during my recovery. The president of our international organization, his name is Daisaku Ikeda, he writes in a book titled Faith into Action under the section of health. He says, if you develop cancer, do not become angry or hateful. Do not feel sad or sorry for yourself. Instead, always burn with hope and a sense of mission based on faith and maintain strong willpower. Such a person can win over illness and make the struggle against sickness more effective and even encouraging. Thanks.
So as you can see, we all practice for probably different reasons. You probably all practice what you practice for different reasons. But for us, I think essentially we would all agree, those of us who practice Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, that one of the greatest benefits of this practice is maintaining a sense of hope. And, with everything that's happened since, in the last 2 weeks, it's really hard to have absolutely nothing but negative feelings. I mean, it's so hard to have any kind of hope. And it's such a struggle. And I think that the more we practice, the more we find we have hope for the future. We see our lives as not being just contained in this little moment here, but expanding from the past into the future. And that helps us generate a kind of confidence that allows us to overcome all of our obstacles. It helps us to share that sense of hope with other people, and that's what we're trying to do. Reaching out to people, friends of ours, a lot of people. My dad is in a search and rescue team in New York. He just got back this week, and he was very hopeless. He felt really hopeless. And it was I told many of my friends, I'm a moderator on an international discussion group for people who practice Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, mostly gay people. I'd say 98% are gay. And I told them that my dad was going to New York and that he was really scared and everything. And people just sent him floods of emails. He had his computer there and sent him a flood of emails, trying to really encourage him and say, you're doing the right thing. This is so great. We really appreciate you. And that kind of feeling of caring for other people is something that I think is often lost in, our everyday world. So I think, for me, that's one of the reasons I stay practicing Buddhism is because of that sense of hope and because of the encouragement that I receive from other people. So that's basically, we have a few minutes left and we wanted to open it up if there are people who had questions or comments or anything. We'd be happy to answer them the best of our ability or whatever. Sure.
Thank you for the chance. It's really beautiful. I have a question. I understand that technically I practice mostly Vipassana, but I wasn't quite getting it. If you might speak a little bit about the differences. I didn't hear any philosophical differences. You said there were differences, and I didn't really get it so far in terms of enlightenment being available and actually not something you have to go get. But
right.
We already have it. It's pretty basic Buddhist concept. So I wasn't clear about what seemed if there's any philosophical.
Well, I think a lot of people would describe it as a practice. I practiced Zen for a long time, and I had a really hard time sitting Zazen. I just thought it was impossible. I have a very active mind, and it was painful to me. And what we're practicing is very, outward. It's a very pushing outward. It's a very loud thing. We really express a lot of our feeling through our chanting. And I think that there are a lot of similarities between various kinds of Buddhism. This Buddhism, I think that a lot of the origin, the difference is in the origin. A lot of things are based on other sutras, and this is based on this Lotus Sutra. There are other sects that practice the Lotus Sutra too, but they're not Nichiren Daishonin. I think that the other thing that makes it different is there's a lot of writing specifically from the founder of this Buddhism, Nichiren Daishonin, which isn't the case with most other kinds of Buddhism. And that's, I think, the easiest way to explain it. Other questions, comments? Sure. Did you get your full look at the Gohonzon? Would you like to look at it some more?
I will.
Pass that back to him.
I was a little gathering that when you talked about how many gays there were in this movement, you said there were 12 million?
Oh, no, there are 12 million people who practice Buddhism. They're not all gay, unfortunately. It's been very attractive. Well, I shouldn't say that because I am married after all. But that's another thing. The SGI is, I think, the only religion, at least the only organized religion in the United States that officially sanctions same-sex weddings. They do them all over the country. It's not exactly a thrill. A lot of people aren't thrilled, but they really try to put their money where their mouth is in that respect. And so Nancy and I, when they first announced they were going to perform same-sex weddings, even though they're not legal, they were a religious ceremony, then my partner and I jumped at the chance, and we were the first couple in San Francisco who were married here. Bold woman that I am. No, in terms of this, Buddhism is really attractive to a lot of gay people. I go all over the country, and there's a lot. I think one of the reasons is that you'll find many religions, and I'm not just saying many Buddhisms, but there are many religions in general where the people are not that diverse. You go to a meeting or something, and there aren't that many people of color, and ours is unbelievably diverse. It's very attractive for that reason. It's a Buddhism of diversity, and so we've got in San Francisco, I'd say, well, just because it's in the Bay Area, I'd say probably 30% of the people who practice are gay, maybe 30% probably. We have what? Yeah. We have 30% African American, 30% Asian, 30%, and maybe 15% Hispanic and 15% white. I mean, it's a very broad movement, in terms of the United States in general, I would say, a good percentage of the people are gay. We had this year our very first conference on Buddhism and sexuality in our national conference center, which is in Florida, in the Everglades. I hate Florida, but it was cheap land, and they restored the wetlands and stuff, and at least there are no alligators, so I'm fine with that. But we had our first conference, and it was the only conference that the SGI has put on since it opened this conference center that was 100% capacity filled. I mean, this is really the intense desire of people who are gay to practice this Buddhism. The other thing that I think maybe differentiates this Buddhism from other kinds is that Nichiren Daishonin was extremely explicit. There is no difference among believers. Men and women are equal. He used an analogy of the cherry, plum, and damson, which actually is a kind of plum, to say that we all have inherent uniqueness and we all possess equally Buddhahood. There are a lot of Buddhist traditions that had an extreme amount of enmity, if you will, towards homosexuality. It wasn't specifically the doctrine of the Buddhism, but it was how it was practiced. There was a lot of control issues about monks having sex with young boys and that kind of thing. So there is no prescription like that. There are no real precepts in this kind of Buddhism. It's basically the law of cause and effect is extremely strict, and no other law is above it. So, I mean, there is no other, and it applies to everyone, whether you practice Buddhism or not. It's like gravity, or you turn on a light switch and the light comes on. It's that, it applies equally to everyone. So that's another way that's fundamentally different.
The other question was, are there monks and nuns, or are they all linked?
Well, that's an interesting question. We are a lay organization. We used to be connected to a priesthood. Nichiren Daishonin was very clear when he wrote in 13th century Japan that you should never follow somebody who distorts this teaching, even if he is a priest or the high priest. And the tradition was, at that time, passed down amongst priests, but there were lay believers who always practiced. And there has been actually a long tradition of problems with the priesthood in this particular kind of Buddhism. And in fact, many kinds of Buddhism after Nichiren Daishonin died were created from a sort of distorted view of what he was teaching. And we as an organization were excommunicated from the priesthood in 1990. So we are no longer connected with the priesthood. There are a number of reformist priests who have left the high priest, the temple in Japan. But the person who's in the high priest position, what he did essentially was say, he changed the rules, and he said, actually, the only way to enlightenment is through me. I'm the only one that can create the quote-unquote eye-opening ceremony. I'm the only one that can endow your Gohonzon with a special power. Nichiren Daishonin didn't say any of that shit. He just said, it's available to everyone. You can have it, you can have it, you can have it. You don't need a priest. So the problem was in that time, in 13th century Japan, that there had to be somebody who would carry on the tradition in the same way that there are priests or other clergy or clerical orders to carry on what was the pure tradition. Unfortunately, a lot of them get distorted. A lot of people would say that basically Catholicism is a distortion of Christianity. We did have that. There was a lot of... we're fine without the priesthood. It was, I think, for some people it was very difficult because a lot of people feel a need for a priesthood or somebody to help them. But we struggled through it and realized that actually we are living exactly what Nichiren Daishonin said, which was we don't need anybody to tell us how to live our lives. So I would say a fraction of the people who practiced when we practiced together went with the priesthood. There are only a fraction of people left, and the rest of us, the vast majority of people who practice this Buddhism are practicing with the SGI.
Diana, we have to close.
Yes.
Are you guys available in case people want to...
Oh, absolutely. We also, if you ever want to contact me or anybody else in our organization, want to find out about meetings, you're more than welcome to attend. We're open to everyone. You please take one of these cards that I handed out and it has information at the back. And I do hope that everybody will take at least one or both of these lovely books that I brought because I don't want to carry them home.
Okay, we'll have announcements and then I'll ask you to close and let you with Diana.
Right.
So, any announcements?
There is a sign-up sheet out on the table.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.